And we do record these so that we can share the recording with folks that are not able to make it to these calls. We put the link. Yeah, hang on, Mary and Rosemary, we'll be back in a minute. So we do record these. We put the link in the upcoming newsletter so that folks that weren't able to be here can still see this. We are going to turn it over to Shanna for the presentation. We are very lucky to have Shanna here today to talk to us about the Integrated Development Ordinance annual update that starts soon. And clearly, Shanna, you have a lot of people interested in this topic. I think this might be our record for the number of people attending one of these. We do ask folks to save questions and comments until the end. And so I want to make sure that we get through Shanna's presentation. When she's finished, then you can raise your hand if you have questions or comments, and we will take as many as we can before the 11 o'clock mark. So I see that there are hands up. If there's somebody that hasn't gotten introduced, please go ahead and introduce yourself right now. Otherwise, questions, comments, concerns, hold till the end. Okay, so I am going to turn it over to Shanna. I'm going to ask everybody to please mute themselves so that we can all hear Shanna. Take it away.
Thanks, Councilor. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Shanna Schultz. I'm the Council Planning Manager on staff to the Albuquerque City Council. So I work for all 9 of the city councilors. Some, councilors have district-specific staff, but I work more generally for all 9 on topics related to urban planning and certainly the Integrated Development Ordinance, which is what I'm here to talk about today. I'm sure that a lot of you are intimately familiar with the Integrated Development Ordinance, maybe more familiar than you want to be, but let me do just a brief overview of what an Integrated Development Ordinance is. I'm going to call it the IDO from here on out, so I don't have to say those 3 long words every time. So the IDO is the regulatory book within the city of Albuquerque that regulates zoning. Zoning tells you what you can and can't do on private property, how it has to look, how much parking you have to provide, how tall the building can be, what kind of activities can happen on that site. Is it a grocery store? Is it housing? Is it a gas station, etc.? Every city has a zoning code, and ours is called the IDO. Every year, the city aims to update the IDO or crack the book open. It's a pretty hefty book. It's about 700 pages at this point. And at some point during my presentation here, I will throw some links into the chat about where you can access some of the documents that I'm going to talk about. So the city adopted the IDO in 2018. So we're about 5 years into our new, still feels new to me, zoning code. And every year, the city opens up the book through what we call the IDO annual update process. There's a few reasons that a city might want to open up their zoning code, and a few reasons that they might want to do it so frequently. We maybe do it more frequently than other cities, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing most days. One reason to open up the book is to be responsive to problems or opportunities that we see within the community. It's really easy for any kind of bureaucratic document, especially a zoning code, to be drafted, adopted, and then just sit on a shelf for 10 or 20 years and not get a lot of updates. Well, the world tends to move a little faster than 10 to 20 years. And so the fact that we look at our zoning framework, our regulatory framework on an annual basis to kind of ask ourselves the question, what needs to be changed? What can the city better respond to from a regulatory perspective to make sure that we have a code that's responding to development needs in the city? So we embark on this annual update process every year. This will be update number 4, I believe. And for those in the room who have participated in the IDO annual updates before, it's quite the process. It's a year-long process from start to finish. I think we're trying our best to make it as accessible to everyone as possible and update folks at every step of the way. And what I'm here to talk about today is what all those steps are and how you get involved, at what point in the process you should get involved, what type of involvement is appropriate, what staff members you talk to, all that good stuff. So we just wrapped up the last iteration of the IDO annual update in June of this year, maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago. The city council made their final votes on that package. And so as of July 27th of this year, again, just about a week or so ago, we have a new IDO in effect. I will pop a link into the chat for that document. But now that we've finished the 2022 IDO annual update, we are embarking on the 2023 IDO annual update. And that process always starts with the planning department. So the planning department is kind of the initial gatekeeper of IDO annual update items. They have a set of very qualified staff members, educated and trained urban planners who talk to interested stakeholders, community members, business owners, developers, any kind of stakeholder that you could imagine within the city, and they collect their ideas. And this idea collection kind of happens throughout the year. Even while we're wrapping up the 2022 update or any previous update, the planning department is always thinking about ideas for next year's proposal. And so they're working with city staff, they're working with neighborhood associations, they're working with the development community to say, what is working well within our code right now? Or maybe more importantly, what's not working well and how can we improve it? And so the planning department is knee deep in that stage right now, kind of the idea gathering stage. And so if zoning is something you're interested in and you have big ideas, little ideas, or even just questions, either me as a planning staff member at the city or staff members within the planning department itself are the folks that you should be talking to. And over the next 2 months, so between August and September, the planning department will be collecting ideas. They take all ideas. I will say that doesn't mean that they are going to put forth all ideas that they receive, but they are absolutely willing to hear any ideas you have, kind of talk through those ideas, understand why you think that's a good idea, how it would benefit the city, how it fits within our existing framework. And ultimately, at the end of kind of the public engagement process, they will put forth a list of changes. The very first IDO annual update, which was in 2019, I think there were something like 300 changes. It was a spreadsheet, it was a massive spreadsheet that kind of made your eyes roll into the back of your head. I'm pleased to report that as the years have gone on, as we're into update number 4 at this point, I think last year's spreadsheet had 40 or less items. And a lot of these items tend to be cleanups. That's another good reason for a city to open up their code every year is in a 700-page technical document, there are bound to be errors. There are bound to be things that are left up to interpretation that should not be left up to interpretation. And so it gives the city a good way to go in and make sure, to the best of our ability, that we have a really kind of tight document. And so I would argue that a lot of the changes that could get put forth aren't substantive in nature. Substantive is a very objective word. I understand that. A subjective word, it's not objective, it's subjective. But I do think a lot of the fixes that they tend to put forth are cleanup type things. So over the next 2 months, you should be reaching out to the planning department. I'm also going to pop in an email address into the chat, and that gets you to the IDO team. There's a couple of staff members over there who really specialize in the zoning code and this IDO annual update process, and they are the folks who you should hear from. So I'll put an email address and some names into the chat. So through August and September, it's catching our breath from the last IDO annual update finishing, and also just gathering ideas for 2023. In October, the planning department finalizes their list and will publish that list. And these are the ideas that have kind of made it through their professional vetting process to say, these are the good ideas that further adopted City of Albuquerque policies. One thing to keep in mind is that anytime that we open up the zoning code, anytime that we make a text amendment to the code, there's some review and decision criteria that those changes have to be based on. And the biggest one relates to the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan in the City of Albuquerque is a long-term visioning document. I will also pop a link in the chat to that document in a moment, that the city recently updated as well. In 2017, the city adopted a new long-term 30-year vision for the city that really outlines the policies behind how we want to grow, the issues we're trying to tackle, and how best to tackle them. Any text amendment to the IDO has to conform with the policies within that plan. It's a pretty meaty plan, much like the integrated development ordinances. I don't know that I would suggest reading it back to front, but if you're really interested in housing, for example, there's a whole chapter on housing. If you're interested in preservation, there's a whole chapter on preservation. There's a whole chapter on transportation. And anytime we make a change to the technical code, those changes need to conform with the policies in that plan. Those two documents should be working together. The comprehensive plan sets the vision, the integrated development ordinance makes that vision happen. And so often, as you're bringing ideas to the planning department or to your counselor or any other kind of staff member throughout the process who has the ability to put forth changes, the first question that we should be asking in the back of our head is that change aligned with the long-term vision for the city of Albuquerque? If it is, then that's a great way to justify the change. If it's not, that's when changes can sometimes be rejected. So in August and September, we're in the idea collection stage. In October, the planning department will publish a list based on changes that they feel are furthering the comprehensive plan, are aligned with the long-term vision of the city, and meet the other review and decision criteria associated with the text change to the documents. They'll do another set of public meetings at that point to say, here's our kind of first stab at what we think should be changed in the 2023 update. Come talk to us, public, about the ideas we're putting out there. So that's an opportunity with the planning department where you will be able to give them some feedback on what they think is a good change or a set of good changes to the zoning code. After that public process in October, then the planning department will formally submit into the review and decision process. And it is a long process. I think on average, it probably takes us 6 to 7 months every year. It's about half the year just getting through the review and decision process. But it's a thorough one. There are many bodies that these changes have to go through. And at every step in that process, you have an opportunity to come talk to the decision makers in the city to say, I support that change. That's a great idea. I think that could have a long-term impact on Albuquerque, or on the opposite end, I don't support that change. Here's why. So the very first step in the review and decision process is before a board called the Environmental Planning Commission. It is mandated within the IDO that these updates always have their first hearing in December. So information gathering, August, September, public meetings in October, the planning department will submit October, November, and then the first public hearing before the Environmental Planning Commission will happen in December. The Environmental Planning Commission, or the EPC, is a 9-member body, all of which are appointed by the City Council. They are kind of like an arm of the City Council, is maybe one way to think about it. The City Council empowers them to make advisory opinions and, in some cases, final decisions on certain planning matters. Ultimately, only the City Council is what we call the ultimate land use planning and zoning authority, but in some instances they delegate that authority. And the EPC is a good example of how that authority is delegated. So that's a 9-member volunteer body, 1 seat per district. Councilors appoint their representative for the district in which they serve. And that body takes the first kind of stab at the IDO annual update. So the planning department staff will present their list of changes to the EPC and answer any kind of questions or concerns, and really present the justification about why these changes meet the review and decision criteria. These are public hearings in which the public is very much invited to participate. You are permitted to speak to this advisory body to provide your opinion on the changes, and then that body takes those opinions, takes the information presented by the planning department, and submits a recommendation to the City Council on the set of changes. So in this instance, the EPC is not the final decision-making authority. They're empowered to kind of work through some of the weeds, get really into the detail of some of these changes, and maybe send a slightly cleaned up package up to the City Council. Then it'll start the City Council review and decision process. And I will say the EPC, they can hear the IDO annual update as many times as they feel is appropriate before getting to the point of a recommendation. I think in last year's update, there was only 1 EPC hearing. They felt comfortable enough with the changes after just 1 hearing. Actually, it was 2. Sorry, it was 2 to send a recommendation to the City Council. But in previous years, it's been 3 or 4. The body will take as long as they need to get to a point of feeling comfortable on taking a vote. After that happens, then it comes up to the city council and still has quite a few review and approval steps at that point. The first stop is at a subcommittee of the city council called the Land Use Planning and Zoning Committee. This is 5 members of the full city council who have been appointed by the president of the council for that year to serve on a committee that speaks specifically to land use planning and zoning issues. So you get 5 city councilors outside of a full-blown city council meeting at committee meetings where they're expected to kind of really dive into the details of any proposed changes to the IDO. For those of us who have participated in this process, we know that those meetings can sometimes be long. Public comment is certainly taken. I think that's one of the best opportunities to speak to your counselor about what you support or not support or do not support. You can talk to them also at full city council meetings, but these committee meetings are really where we are supposed to get into the weeds and talk about the nitty-gritty details of a piece of legislation before it goes up to the full city council. So the LUPS committee, that Land Use Planning and Zoning Committee, will have also as many hearings as they feel like they need before moving that package on to the full city council. At this stage and at the full city council stage, councilors can propose amendments to this package. So what comes out of EPC will be a list of recommendations for changes to the book. The council has full authority to either strike any of those recommendations. If they don't agree with the recommendation of the EPC, they can throw in their own new ideas at this point. Because they are the legislative body in the city, they are absolutely empowered to do that at all stages of the process. And we typically tend to see most of those amendments happen at the committee stage, where the idea is that we're getting into the details of the package. Then it goes up to the full city council. Only the full city council can adopt changes to the IDO, so it has to go before the full body of 9 at some point. And again, at that point, after the EPC review, where the EPC has kind of polished the package, theoretically, at the LUPS review, where the LUPS committee has further kind of polished the package, the idea is that by the time it gets to city council, there should be minimal discussion and debate. Land use and zoning tends to be kind of a hot topic in the city of Albuquerque. And so I would say we tend to get just as much discussion at full city council meetings as we do at committee meetings. But that's part of the process. And that's part of how you as a citizen are empowered to come talk to your elected official about these changes. Do that at the LUPS committee process and do that at the full city council process as well during public comment on the bill. The city council, just like the other bodies, will take as long as they need to review these changes. I've never seen an IDO package be debated and voted on in just one meeting. They've always had multiple hearings, which is good because generally, you come and you give public comment at one hearing, and then the counselors kind of step back for 2 weeks. They think about all the things that they heard. And then at the next meeting, they respond to constituents as necessary. So there are a lot of opportunities for participation in this process. And I would always advise that the earlier you get involved, the better. Zoning matters tend to be pretty complicated. I mean, we're really talking land use law here. It's a pretty technical language, and the sooner that you can get involved with the planning department staff at the start of the process, if you follow those EPC hearings where they're getting really into the details of the changes, and then at LUPS and full council, I've always seen that to be the most successful when you bring your ideas to the table early so that there's lots of time to talk about them, lots of time to think about them. It's not as successful if last minute and, the 12th hour, you're coming to the table with a big brand new idea. That doesn't give anyone the time that they need to understand the change, to know if they're on board with the change. And I think folks do get a little frustrated in this process when they come in late and then have a hard time working with their elected official to get changes made. Do that as early in the process as possible. I've just anecdotally, I've seen that to be the most successful. I will also mention that at this very stage in the process, while the planning department is kind of the empowered staff at the moment to put forth changes, counselors will also be submitting changes to the EPC. I'm doing kind of my job for the counselors and polling them right now on if there's things they're interested in, if there's ideas that they just want to talk through with me as a planning professional to understand, is this a good idea? Kind of what best practices are other cities deploying? Should Albuquerque try something new? What's not working in the code right now? And so there's kind of a parallel track where you can work, you can and should work with the planning department right now. However, you also have the opportunity to work with your elected official, with Councilor Fiebelkorn right now, to throw out ideas to her. You know, sometimes the city council has a different idea than the planners within the planning department and the administration. They are the policymakers for a reason. And so if there's an idea or a concept that the planning department staff or the administration isn't quite sure about, they're maybe not comfortable with, the policymaker absolutely has the right to throw that idea out anyway. And so you've got lots of opportunities to talk with folks, either planning department staff, your counselor, me, about ideas that you want to see. It's a long process. You know, we're just now starting, it's August. The last IDEO annual update only wrapped up in June. So that is like a full 11-month process in which, to the best of your ability and capacity, you should try to follow these changes throughout every iteration in the process. If you are not on the planning department's email list, this is the best resource for following the changes. At literally every stage in the process, they send out an email telling you what hearing is coming up. They'll send you all the documentation associated with that hearing. That will tell you how you can participate in that hearing, or who to reach out to for questions, both at the EPC level and at any council level. And I will pop that information into the chat as well, if you're not already on that list, how to get on that list. I think that covers the highlights of the process. Councilor, are there any particular facets you want me to dive into more detail on?
No, I think that was a good overview. And I think everybody on the call now can see why we are so lucky at council to have Shanna on our staff, because she's able to help hold our hands through this process as well. And I will just say, you know, I already have quite a few suggestions from constituents that I'm meeting with Shanna next week to talk about. One example, and just to iterate, you know, to emphasize what she was saying, somebody came to me with I think, a good idea about campgrounds, but it was, you know, after this had all gone through the EPC, and I just did not feel comfortable injecting a brand new big item into it. And so we're gonna, you know, try to do that from the beginning. But if you do have ideas, get them to me now, get them to the planning department, get them to both of us now, rather than waiting until the last minute, because it is just really difficult to you know, stick new stuff in right at the very end, and not fair to the folks that have been participating from the beginning. So I will, if it's okay with Shannon, we will open it up to questions. If you have a question, please use the raise hand function, and there's a lot of you, so we'll get through as many as we can, but go ahead and then raise your hand if you have any questions. Patricia.
Hi, Councilor Fiebelkorn. I'm one of the people Shanna's referring to as probably being more familiar with the process than I would like to be.
I think that's true.
I had a lot of mixed feelings about the housing forward chunk of changes that went through in addition to the citywide changes. And I would like to hear some explanation of how a major change to the R1 zone complies with the comprehensive plan vision of areas of change versus areas of consistency. Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia. Shannon, do you want to?
Sure. So Patricia's referring to some changes that happened in 22. This question isn't necessarily about the 2023 process, but generally that particular set of changes related to allowing accessory dwelling units in the R1 zone district, the policy body of the city council, did determine that it met the review and decision criteria associated with a text amendment to the IDO, which is that it complies with the comprehensive plan, doesn't apply to a single lot, and generally is within the best interest of the health, safety, and welfare of the residents of Albuquerque. Patricia mentioned something called areas of change and areas of consistency. This is a concept envisioned within the comprehensive plan that gives kind of a designation to every parcel in the city. You're either an area of change or you're an area of consistency. And the idea between areas of change and consistency is that the city wants to promote and encourage development in areas of change, but not necessarily promote a lot of kind of high density, lots of economic activity in areas of consistency. R1 zone neighborhoods, which is about 70% of the city, do have the area of consistency designation, which means for the most part, we shouldn't be encouraging a lot of development activity in those. I think the policy argument that the council ultimately agreed with is that one extra unit on a lot, that's an accessory dwelling unit, would not rise to the level of the type of change that we would expect to see in an area of change, that it's still consistent with an area of consistency, because the impact of a 750 square foot at most dwelling units isn't going to change the overall kind of activity or character of an area.
Thanks, Shanna. Cheryl, I saw your hand go up, but then I saw it go down. So I just want to make sure you didn't have a question. Trying to take it in order. Oh, wait, I see that she put, never mind, she's not there. Oh, wait, maybe she is. Cheryl?
Oh, yeah, I put it in the chat. The presentation was great. Thank you so much for all of that information. I will keep listening.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. Any other questions for Shanna while we have her here? She is the person that I go to anytime I have a question on IDO. And so I'm really thankful that she was able to give us this time. Any other questions? Evelyn, you're on mute. Yeah.
At what point in the process is the public notified of major changes, and how are they notified? Because most people I know know nothing about Housing Forward.
Sure. So the IDO annual update is considered a text amendment to the IDO, and there are notice requirements for how the city has to engage with the public about that. The bulk of that notification happens through neighborhood associations. If there are neighborhood associations within District 7 that you participate in, the leaders in that neighborhood association will receive kind of formal email notices from the city to say we are beginning this process, and here's how you get involved. Again, that email distribution list managed by the planning department is going to be the best way for an individual citizen who maybe isn't represented by a neighborhood association, or for whatever reason doesn't participate with their neighborhood association, or maybe their neighborhood association isn't great at kind of getting information down to their members. You will get a direct email, a very detailed email at every stage in the process. I personally think that's the best way to stay kind of up to date on the process, is to get on that distribution list from the planning department, because they'll send you hyperlinks to relevant documents. As councilors release amendments later in the process, they will keep you updated on those so that you can review those materials for the hearings. So the first answer is through your neighborhood association, and the second kind of more detailed and maybe suggested answer is get on that email distribution list, which I just typed up in the chat.
Okay, well, I would say probably 90% of people are not in neighborhood associations. And so how does anybody know to get on the email list? Shouldn't a mass mailing go out saying, if you want to know about what's happening in the city, you need to go on this mailing list? And also there's still a large portion of people who do not do computer.
Sure. The city, gosh, what was the last count I saw? Has about 190 registered neighborhood associations. So well more than half of the city is covered by a neighborhood association who does get these notices from the city.
People are not members of neighborhood associations.
No, we're not going to crosstalk. We're going to ask questions and then let Shanna answer.
And so I would encourage participation in your neighborhood association, but for folks who don't, the city often hears that request, why don't you send out a mailer every time you're doing something related to zoning in the city? Logistically, that's just really hard. There are about 580,000 parcels in the city, and to notify every single property owner, which per law, we're not obligated to do. I think if we could financially manage it, it would be a great practice. My little planning heart would really love if we could send a direct notice to every property owner, but it's really just infeasible, which is why we rely on things like registered neighborhood associations. The planning departments will put notices in the paper. I think folks still read the paper. They'll do a lot of social media outreach. And I hear your point that not everyone has access to technology, not everyone chooses to use technology, but those do seem to be the best ways for the city to reach the majority of folks right now.
What about sending out a letter with the Bernalillo County Assessor when they send out the tax notifications?
Yeah, I think logistically, you still run into the same problem that it's about the city paying to print 580,000 pieces of paper. Also, the assessor is pretty stringent about what they allow to go into those notifications. You often have the Water Utility Authority wanting to send notices out, other utilities, and so we often find ourselves kind of fighting for the envelope space in those anyway.
I'll just add that I saw in the chat somebody saying about, putting them in bill inserts for like the Water Utility Authority. A huge majority of people do not get paper bills anymore. They've signed up for online billing. So it really is difficult to reach folks. And I can say that sending a mail piece doesn't actually reach everyone. We sent a mail piece about our District 7 newsletter to every address in District 7. And when we got redistricting and we added a few areas, we sent a mail piece to them, and still people say they don't know about our District 7 newsletter. So it is a challenge to just keep people informed. I think the best thing, if they don't know about this, is to reach out to their counselors, follow something. It's always on the city's website. We mentioned it in our District 7 newsletter. I'm sure a lot of the other city councilors who have newsletters do the same. So it's an never-ending challenge on getting the word out to people about anything that the city is doing. Evelyn, did you have another question? Okay. Peggy.
Councilor, if I can add just one more, you kind of pinged my memory about something related to water bills and tax bill inserts. Those only go to people who own property, and we absolutely invite renters and folks who don't have the opportunity or choose not to own property. We absolutely also want those folks at the table and participating. Renters don't get water bills; those only go to property owners, for example. And so, even if we wanted to do that, we would still also be missing a very important portion of the population who should participate in this process because it impacts their way of life just as much as a property owner.
Good point, Shanna. Peggy, did your hand go down?
No, I took it down because I often forget to take it down after I've spoken.
Go ahead.
But I heard you call on me, and I thank you for hosting this. And Shanna, thank you for the overview. It sounds so positive and so fast forward thinking, but truly land zoning issues aren't supposed to be changed in such a what I think is a haphazard form. We've been asking for many years for a division between textual updates and substantive updates. The fact that substantive is a subjective term doesn't mean that the attempt to address beneficiaries of statements of beneficiaries, statements of risk, statements of who is impacted, those things really ought to be included in all zone changes. We have that right to have that information in front of us before our counselors are representing our opinions, because we can't figure out what our opinions are without that information. To be honest with you, so many things have passed that have taken a lot of things away from the Albuquerque community, our voice, our walkability, our investments in our own homes, our own private properties. And I speak as an example of that from one of the amendments from 2020 that was changed in 2022. risk analysis is very important. We have so many lawsuits against the city in regard to these changes that you have made. And this is a risk that you are putting us, that not you, Shannon, not you, Councilman Fiebelkorn, but the city is putting themselves at risk. And this is a problem. We want examples, clear examples, and current data on the changes that you're putting forth. We want to see community comments in a comprehensive way, not a haphazard way, like here's this for it, here's this against it, here's this, that maybe here's this. We need to see, here are the top 3 problems with this, here are the top 3 supports of this. This happened in 2021 and it was very successful. And I don't understand why we can't go back to that. The issue of notifications is still a major problem, but you can't say, oh, it's just too difficult to do. It's law that people are notified about changes to their properties. Going through the neighborhood associations, really, Councilwoman Fiebelkorn, I really wish you would take another look at that, because if you look at the average neighborhood association, they cannot comply. And the individual is not getting notified of something that goes up right next to them. The changes that you make to the overlays of community areas that are protected, that has to be a different type of change. It can't just be added into a textual amendment and maybe even not even a substantive amendment, but these are legal proceedings that have to be given to the people who have the right to those protections that they have worked for. There's a lot of things that are improved in the process, but truly the information flow for data is not there. The things that go on that we have asked for have not happened. I applaud you again for trying this out and for pushing forward with this, and I hope to see it again and again and again. And the integrated development ordinance amendments will go through the same process that we put them through before. We do have a metric. The Intercoalition Council uses a metric of whether or not it's a public safety issue or whether or not there are so many questions that haven't been addressed. Those 2 things give us the tag of substantive. And if we can come up with that, y'all can come up with a set of metrics that the EPC can be asked to use to design if this is substantive and needs to be talked at tables across the city. You have one area that did an assessment, the community planning areas, and many of those ideas are written in there. I don't know if anybody's reviewed that, Shanna. I ask you directly, have you?
Oh, shoot. Peggy, you are frozen.
Citywide area amendments assessment, and then go and put that onto the rest of the city without having those areas also talk. When we first had the IDO go forward, we were told that this annual process would be textual and technical in order to address the removal of sector plans and the conglomeration of all sorts of district plans and other ordinances. But we were also told that on a 5-year planning process, citywide amendments would be talked about at different citywide tables across the city, and then those amendments would go through the process. Now that has all changed, and that's not really part of the process anymore, but truly, citywide amendments need to be talked about by more than 100 people.
Thanks, Peggy. I don't know if there was a question in there. Was there a question to Shanna?
Yeah, I'd like to hear whether or not suggested amendments that were in the first area community planning area report have been put into any sort of format. I'd like to know if there's
let's do one question at a time. I want to make sure that folks get a chance to have an answer, and then I want other people to have a chance to ask questions. So that was the first question. Shanna?
Yeah, that's a good question. Peggy's referencing the community planning area assessment process, which to fill your brain with another kind of planning effort that the city endeavors to. The city has identified 12 areas within the city of Albuquerque boundary, and those are called community planning areas. And for about a year at a time, staff from the planning department has a kind of boots on the ground approach where they spend time in that community talking with residents about what's working, what's not working. And this is not only related to land use and zoning. I mean, they engage with every department of the city to ask, you know, how is solid waste doing in your district, or how are the parks in your district? So it's not narrowly tailored to the IDO or to any kind of zoning framework, but they do also engage with the community on what in the zoning code is working and what's not. Out of that effort comes a report called a community planning area assessment. The city has only completed one of these, and only one of them has been approved by the city for an area called Near Heights. And within that report, there are recommendations about zoning where the planning department says, we engaged with community members. Here's what they told us about the IDO. It's then on the planning staff or the city councilor to kind of respond to that report and put forth amendments based on what the community said. It's my understanding that as the planning department is compiling their list of changes right now, they are absolutely referring to that community planning area assessment report for Near Heights, taking suggestions from that report, and will be making those in their submittal for 2023. You'll be able to find out more about that once they release their proposed list of changes in October.
Thanks,
So
Shannon.
you're
Nikki,
not familiar
next
with-
question.
Is there any chance that you all might take another look at substantive amendments versus textual amendments? And if not, what do we need as a community to do to ask you to do that?
Yeah, the planning staff and counselors have heard this request for a couple of years. And I still think the problem is the same, that what I think is substantive and you think is substantive might not be the same. And so planning staff and counselors are having to make kind of judgment calls on what we think is technical and what you think is substantive. And it makes more sense for us to just put everything in one list and have the conversation about everything at the same time. There's not necessarily a downside to doing that. I don't think it's feasible from a staff point of view to make that distinction in a way that's gonna not make somebody upset.
So
I'm gonna move on because we have 10 minutes left, Peggy. I'm gonna come back to you if we have time at the end, if that's okay. Because we do have 3 other people with their hands up. So I'm gonna move to Jane.
Thank you. First, thank you, Councilor Fiebelkorn and Shanna, for making this time available. I wanted to circle briefly back to, I think I understood, and this is part of my question, is the ABC comp plan considered to have sort of primacy over land use decisions, in that they should always comply, I guess, with ABC comp plan policies and procedures? And within that context, I and our neighborhood association have addressed a number of proposals based on our view of the policies and procedures regarding heritage protection and open space. And I guess my other question is, are those considered to really be primary objectives and goals of the ABC comp plan?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks, Jane. So the comprehensive plan is what we would call a rank 1 plan. The integrated development ordinance is a rank 2 plan. And then there are a whole set of rank 3 plans that I won't talk about today. And ideally, the integrated development ordinance is very specifically responding to the policies within the comprehensive plan. Whenever we have a regulation in the IDO, it should be able to tie back to a policy in the comprehensive plan to say, we have this rule because it's furthering this vision as set forth in the comprehensive plan. Now, at the planning department, there are some decisions that are considered administrative in nature that aren't discretionary, that if you meet the requirements in the IDO, you can check all those boxes, you'll get an approval. And there are other decisions that are discretionary that do rely on comprehensive plan policies more directly. For the administrative decisions, the idea is that because the IDO is furthering policies in the comprehensive plan, it is a vision of the comprehensive plan, that discretionary, that you don't need policy discretion in those decisions because the IDO itself is already responding to the policies in the comprehensive plan. For bigger discretionary decisions that ask decision makers to look more explicitly at those policies, that there's more of a direct tie to the comprehensive plan for those, Jane, but for a majority of the decisions, the IDO is the document we rely on to implement the comprehensive plan as it kind of falls in that rank system of 1, 2, and 3. Does that, I think that answers the first part of your question, I'm hoping.
Yes.
Okay. Was there a second piece? Sorry.
So the second piece, I guess, was I have a very strong bias in favor of the policies and procedures in the comp plan that relate to both open space and heritage conservation. And I guess it's question, comment, are those considered of equal weight as other policies and goals in the comp plan?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when decision makers are considering the comprehensive plan, they really need to be considering all policies, whether they're in the kind of urban design section that say we're a growing city, we need to promote density in certain areas, or in the heritage and conservation section that says we have so many special places like the petroglyphs that we need to protect. Kind of a direct example that I can quickly give to speak to that is the comp plan talks a lot about open space, major public open space. We have such a special asset here in Albuquerque that we have the petroglyphs, we have the bosque, we have the foothills, and our comprehensive plan says those are areas that should be protected. The IDO should be making that vision true. And so an example of a regulation that the councilors just passed in June says that within 330 feet of major public open space, developers cannot utilize building height bonuses. So in other areas of the city where we might encourage and incentivize more density, there's now a regulation that furthers a policy to say we want to protect open space, and a way to do that is to limit the intensity near open space. I hope that's a maybe tangible example of how a regulation in the IDO kind of ties directly back to the policy and how that regulation kind of furthers that policy.
Thanks, Shanna. I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to at least ask one question. So I'm going to go to Michael next. And I'll go Michael, Renee, then back to Evelyn, then back to Peggy, depending on how much time we have. So go ahead, Michael.
Councilor, thank you very much. And Shanna, very good presentation. Shanna and Councilor, one of the things that the ICC has been very interested in is getting that opt-in provision for people who want to opt in to get information about projects that are going on in community. This is in addition to the 2 notices that go to each neighborhood association. So I ask for your consideration of that again. I think that some action was taken in the IDO, but I think we need to take a look at that and get as much information out to the general public as we can. The idea here is to get as many people as possible to become active, constructive participants in government. Thank you both very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Michael. Shanna, do you have a quick comment on that?
Yeah, just the type of opt-in notice system that Michael is referencing is really a technological problem at the city of Albuquerque right now. We have a very antiquated set of software that handles all of the zoning permitting and processing. I'm excited to say that the city council just last budget cycle allocated about $2 million for state-of-the-art software. This is kind of the cream of the crop that all cities are starting to gravitate towards that will make us be able to consider things like opt-in notice. I'm not going to promise that the software will do that because there's some kind of legal ripples to that need to be thought through, but it's a software problem now. We'll have new software within the next 18 months that will really be able to kickstart that conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shanna. All right, we're going to go to Renee.
Thank you, Councilor Fiebelkorn and Shanna.
Well, as you know, I'm also very involved in the IDO. We live near the petroglyphs and we work very hard to try to preserve them. What I'm concerned about with this whole IDO process is it's being used to what they call remove zoning restrictions, but these are what we call zoning protections for our neighborhoods and our open space areas. And every year, we get more intense zoning that is not appropriate backed up to residents or backed up to open space. So we talk about areas of consistency to be preserve the character of the area, but the areas of change back up to those areas of consistency, and they're too intense already. And once you give an entitlement away to be more intense or dense, it's hard to go back. And these are really inappropriate for areas near neighborhoods or near open space areas. And in this last go round, we removed a very vital protection for the petroglyphs in changing the view preservation overlay height restrictions, which is now under appeal by our group. And I'm really concerned about the mesa top and preservation of and the building heights that are going up there, because the IDO does allow 38, 48, 55, 65 foot high buildings up there. Completely inappropriate. I'm not sure how we can fix that. You know,
Renee, I'm going to interrupt and say, I don't think I can hear this conversation specifically about that appeal. So I'm going to let Shanna talk. First of all, I'm going to ask, because it is 11 o'clock and we are out of time and I have two hands still up after you. Shanna, would you be able to stay on for an additional 5 minutes? If you have other things, please let us know.
I have something at 11:15, but that gives me, about 10 to 15 minutes of wiggle room to stick around.
I only have 5 additional minutes because my 5-pound dog has a specialist appointment for an eye doctor today. So I'm going to leave 11 to 5, but I do want to make sure that we get this question answered, not specifically about that case, Shanna, but can you just talk about the view protection overlays and the petroglyphs?
Yeah, so the IDO does have protections in place for what we would consider special areas. There are historic protection overlays, view protection overlays, character protection overlays. On the west side of Albuquerque, there's a view protection overlay specific to the Northwest Mesa Escarpment and the petroglyphs that generally seeks to limit density and intensity as you get closer to those natural features. Again, that's part of the whole kind of areas of change and consistency and centers and corridors approach within our framework that says, let's keep intense development away from those areas and focus it in more appropriate areas. That view protection overlay zone has been in place for several years now. It did get slightly modified recently. That is at district court. So we at Councilor Fiebelkorn can't talk about that. And I also can't talk about that. But generally, the IDO has tools to protect special places where we want to see views protected. Yes.
Thanks, Shanna. And I'll just say, Shanna put her phone number in the chat. I encourage you to talk to her about that. I apologize that I can't talk about these kind of cases, but I don't think that you want me to have to recuse myself. So we try to keep that line. And just for folks that aren't aware, if there's an active case, an appeal, it's going to come to city council and I'm not allowed to have conversations outside of the record on those. We have 4 minutes left. So I'm going to go to Evelyn real quick. Evelyn, let's get your question in and see if Shanna can get that answered.
Okay, I just had a quick suggestion. I'd say 95% of renters pay their electricity and gas bills. So maybe that's an option. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you. We do run into the same problem again of most people don't get paper bills at PNM or New Mexico Gas Company either, but good point. Let's go. Renee, I'm sorry. Did you have a second question quickly?
Well, just real quick, it seems like we're getting rid of a lot of protections. How do we get them back? Can we even get them back once you give them away?
So that's why we're here today. I'm sorry, Shannon, I'm just gonna say that's why we're here today. There's a process for the IDO updates. That's why I wanted Shannon to give us all the details on how to get involved in that so that you can participate in that process. And then I'm gonna run back to Peggy real quick before we run out of time. Oh, Peggy, you're on mute.
I just want to ask one question in regard to the balloon fiesta, the proposed arena in that area. Does it require amendments to the IDO? And if this is the process that we are using to make changes to our citywide zone code in order to fit in a proposal, that is spot zoning. So are we clear? Can I be clear? There's no changes needed for that proposal and they're not going to be seen on the IDO amendment list this year?
Let Shanna get an answer to that question real quick. Go ahead, Shanna.
First, I'll clarify that wouldn't be an example of spot zoning. Spot zoning is a pretty technical term related to changing the zoning map, related to the type of zoning districts around you. Happy to chat with folks about spot zoning if they want to know more about what that is. Second, I'm not familiar with that project. My understanding is that it has not been submitted for the review and approval process yet. I've heard lots of kind of conversation that generally the United Soccer Stadium is looking to go in at or near Balloon Fiesta Park, but until they make an application to the city, I personally have not been part of any of those conversations.
And I'll just say, Peggy, that no one has been part of those conversations, at least no one I know of. So my entire knowledge on that project is what you've all read in the paper. And I don't think Shanna has any additional knowledge on that project. So
It's as we go through like these things, if there was like a column that said, this is going to affect this big, huge citywide project, then people could see, okay, heads up. This is not a technical change, but it's a substantive change that's going to affect a larger project.
got it, Peggy. We heard your point. We have duly noted it. Okay, it is 11:05. I'm going to stop this call and take my little dog to his eye appointment so he doesn't lose his eye. I'm so thankful that you all were able to join us this month. Remember, we do these on different topics every single month. We are happy to have so many people from District 7 here. We're also happy to have so many people outside of District 7. Please join us again next month. If you're not signed up for the District 7 newsletter, please go onto the website and sign up. We do try to include IDO things in there, everything that we know that's happening in the city, we try to put in that newsletter. And please write down Shanna's phone number from the chat. And reach out to her with any more questions that we didn't get answered because we ran out of time. Thanks again to Shanna for sharing her expertise and knowledge. She's really, an amazing resource for the citizens of Albuquerque. Keep her number and use it whenever you have questions. We will see you next month. Thanks.